How do you make a note that feels like this? Ah! Feel more like this. Ah! In this video, I am breaking down why we strain and how to eliminate it so that you can sing with greater ease. Why do we strain to begin with? Simply put, it has to do with the relationship between your air supply and your vocal cords. I think to understand strain, it helps to understand a little bit about your anatomy of breathing in general. So your lungs are here, and then your diaphragm is here. Your lungs attach at the bottom to your diaphragm. They attach at the sides and at the back to your ribs. So whenever your diaphragm lowers or your ribs expand, you get more air into the lungs. Whenever your ribs compress or your diaphragm lifts, air is going to move out of the lungs, okay? What's the journey look like then from the lungs, right? So once air is here in your lungs, when it leaves, it goes through your trachea, your windpipe. Inside of your trachea is your larynx. Inside of your larynx are your vocal cords. So the air moves from your lungs through your windpipe, passing through the space of your vocal cords, eventually rises either to your nose or to your mouth and goes out your body. Same thing is true when you bring air in. It comes through the nose or through the mouth. It goes down through the windpipe, passing through the vocal cords, down into the space of your lungs, okay? So there's a real relationship between this cavity here and this cavity here, which you probably knew, but now you can kind of trace the path a little bit more easily. So the rate that we move air from this space up to the vocal cords is going to have a really, really large impact on the sound that we produce. Depending on the type of sound you're trying to make and the pitch of that sound, so tone and pitch. Tone is like the quality of the sound. So would be a breathy sound. Would be a pressed sound. Those were both the same pitch, but they had different tone qualities. And then pitch refers to how high or how low a note is. So depending on the tone quality and the pitch, you're going to need a different amount of air to produce that sound. So oftentimes when we strain, it has to do with the amount of air that we are supplying to the vocal cords. And if we're not supplying exactly the right amount of air, that's when we get into trouble. So that's when this broader topic of breath support comes in, right? And you'll see countless videos out there on it. It's one of the big topics in the voice teaching world because it's so important that you supply the right amount of air to your vocal cords for the sound that you are trying to make. Okay, great. How do you know how much air to supply? Your ear governs a lot of this, you guys. It's amazing how much your ear really ends up affecting what you're doing with your body. So your ear is really deciding a lot of this for you. So that's one thing. But then the other part of it is, I think it's just a little bit of a guess and check. Do I need more air? Do I need less air? Do I need faster air or do I need slower air? I'm going to link another video I did on breath support where I talk about these topics, about understanding what like kind of big sluggish air is versus what fast energized air is, because I think that's important. But the larger thing to understand here in terms of why we strain is it's not the right amount of air. So if you need more air is going to get supplied to your vocal cords the more you compress some aspect of your torso. So if you contract your abdominal muscles, that's going to help the diaphragm rise more quickly. It's going to push more air out of your lungs. If you squeeze your rib cage or if you collapse your chest, I wouldn't really recommend this approach for reasons that I won't get into, but you are going to end up supplying more air to your cords. So one thing that I would try if you feel like you're straining is see, like maybe I need to supply some more air. Try really contracting your core when you go to that higher note. Now, if you end up hacking and coughing, you're like, well, that didn't work at all, then maybe try the opposite. Sometimes we're supplying too much air to the vocal cords. And if that's the case, then you want to try to keep the diaphragm down, keep the ribs open, keep the chest lifted. Okay, you're like, great, how do I keep my diaphragm down? I understand the rib part and the chest part, but how do I keep my diaphragm down? If you can just kind of think of the space between your hips and your collarbones as being one big container that's all full of air. What you want to do there is just make sure that you're not collapsing through that space, okay? So hold your belly open, hold your ribs open, hold your chest open, and see if that helps. I'm going to be honest, this is a grossly oversimplified description of what it means to support the sound or what breath support is, but I want you to understand, just sort of simply speaking, how to supply more air to your vocal cords and how to supply less air. So to supply more, contract. To supply less, push out. And just see, like, did one or the other help you find a little bit more ease? Okay, so now you understand what it means to supply more air to your vocal cords and less air to your vocal cords. Cool, let's say you tried that and you're like, man, neither of those helped at all. The other aspect of this is, how tightly are you closing your vocal cords and how much air are you letting pass through? Because you can be supplying all the air in the world, but if you're clamping your vocal cords down, that's just gonna make you strain more. So in order to experience this, try an exercise. Do this, go, huh! And what you should feel is this like clamping down of your vocal cords and all this air kind of being contained in your torso. So try that again. Huh! Right? Like think like, huh, huh, hi, right? You can feel the cords close and then no air is rising through the space of your throat anymore. You can also try it just by simply holding your breath. Take a big breath in. And then two things are happening. You're holding the whole trunk of your torso open, but you're also closing your vocal cords. Okay, so let's add a little bit of sound to this. You're gonna make a really pressed sound. Think like from Dumb and Dumber, like what's the most annoying sound in the world? Do something like that. It probably won't feel great, but what you'll feel is like, yeah, my cords are like really tightly closed, right? So if your cords are really tightly closed and then you're sending a ton of air, that's what you're gonna get. You're gonna get that really pressed and probably strained sound. Now let's try the opposite. Make a really breathy sound, go, and hopefully you can kind of feel how your vocal cords are really open when you do that, or even just an H, go, right? The vocal cords are really, really open in that configuration. So again, you could be like supplying a lot of air, but it's like getting lost because your vocal cords aren't coming together enough when you do that. So the way that might show up if you were going for a high note is like, and it kind of feels like a scream because your cords are too open, you're letting too much air come through, versus, right now my cords are too closed and I can't get enough air through. So again, I like to take this approach of try one extreme and then try the other, right? If there's a note that's giving you challenge that you're really, really straining on, almost try to sing it a little breathy to see if you can feel what that's like to have that more like open position of the vocal cords. And then try singing it really like pressed and ugly and see what that's like when you're singing it with a slightly more closed position of the vocal cords. Now I do want to clarify one thing about this. When you are making sound, your vocal cords at all times are doing this. And they're doing it very fast. But the more time they spend in this position versus this position, right? It's really actually more like this. The more time they spend here versus here is the one that is the thing that determines the sound that you make, right? So a pressed sound is going to spend a lot more time like this, and then a breathy sound is going to spend a lot more time like this. So play with those different settings of your vocal cords, right? And then you might just try to aim for something that feels like it's in between. So if I go for that high note and I go, and that feels really breathy, and then I'm going to do it with that really tight sound of, okay, and that feels really pressed, and then I'm going to go for something kind of in between of, that feels a little bit better. Is that a finished sound? No, it's not, but it's just kind of how you're going to start navigating your way there. It's really hard to do two things at once, but you really do eventually have to send the right amount of air and put your vocal cords into the right position of closed versus open. So until you get that dynamic between those two things correct, it's going to be pretty challenging. And then there is a third component of it, which is how thick or how thin are your vocal cords? Like where are things kind of resonating? That has to do with a concept called registration. Now, vocal registers are super confusing, and I break those down in a separate video as well. So I will go ahead and link that too, so that you can check that video out, Demystifying Vocal Registers. But vocal registers refer to things like chest voice, head voice, which you've maybe heard before. So where I place the sound in my body also has a bearing on the setting that my vocal cords end up in. So if I place the sound in what feels more like my head, which is what we might refer to as head voice, my vocal cords are going to be in this like longer, thinner setting. If I place it here in my chest, they're going to be in this like thicker, fatter, more closed setting. So where I kind of place it in my body, where I choose to resonate the sound, is going to determine the position of my vocal cords, which will also have an impact on strain. So for instance, that full chest voice, it's got a limit to how high you can go with that. At some point, you're going to reach an end cap. It's usually around the D, an octave above middle C. That's typically the end cap for that. In which case, after that, you can still be in a more chest dominant register, but you're going to have to make some adjustments so that it lightens up a little bit and it starts to feel like the resonance moves here. And then from there, eventually you're going to have to make some adjustments so that it feels like the resonance moves here. And as it does that, the chords go from their like thickest, heaviest position into thinner and longer positions as you move up. And again, that's going to impact the way air moves through the space of the vocal cords and any potential feeling of strain. So the short answer to why we strain is we don't have the right relationship between our air and our vocal cords. So if you want to stop straining, definitely check out my video on better breath support, or check out any video on breath support, because that's going to be huge. I think we all kind of already know that, but hopefully now you know why. And then check out my other videos on registration, because getting your vocal cords into the right configuration for the sound that you're trying to make is really going to help that relationship between your vocal cords and your air supply so that you can be super efficient and sing without strain. Good luck, you guys. Happy singing.